I found my husband's wedding ring in a taxi. Only he wasn't supposed to be in that taxi. And when I asked the driver about it, he said, he wasn't the first man to forget one. That sentence cracked something inside me. I'm glad you're here because I need to tell this right. Not just what happened that night, but what it did to me. Maybe if I say it out loud, I'll finally stop replaying it. It was a Wednesday. Nothing dramatic about that. Rainy, slow, midweek exhaustion. Just the kind of day where you go through motions. I'd been at work late, my hair frizzing from humidity, my patience thin from emails and small talk. All I wanted was to get home, shower, and crawl into bed next to Mark, my husband of 8 years. My safe place. Or so I thought. When I opened the cab door that night, I didn't notice anything unusual. Just the faint smell of cigarette smoke, a hint of cheap pine-scented air freshener, the kind of smell that sticks to fabric but not memory. I slid across the back seat and my hand brushed something cold. A small metal ring, smooth and heavy. I almost ignored it, until the pattern caught the streetlight, 2 tiny scratches on the inner side. The same scratches I'd seen 100 times before, back when I'd twisted that ring on Mark's finger while we watched TV. A dent from the time he dropped it on the kitchen floor. I knew that ring. I'd bought it, engraved it. For a second I thought, maybe it's just similar. Maybe I'm tired seeing what I want to see. But my thumb found the engraving on the inside, barely legible from where. M+C. Always. And that was it. No denial could protect me anymore. The driver noticed me staring at the ring. He caught my eye in the rearview mirror. "That one's been rolling around for hours," he said casually. I keep meaning to drop it off somewhere. People forget all sorts of things in this car. Phones, keys, rings. Then he chuckled, like it was some everyday joke. Funny thing, though, the guy who left that one, he wasn't the first man tonight to forget his wedding ring. He said it so simply, so carelessly. But I felt my stomach twist. I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you remember what he looked like?" He shrugged. A tall brown hair, business type. Wore a gray suit. Pretty common around here, gray suit. Brown hair, business type. It could have been anyone. But it was also exactly what Mark had worn that morning. I didn't ask more. I didn't trust my voice not to shake. Instead, I slipped the ring into my palm, closed my fingers around it, and let it burn against my skin all the way home. When I walked into our apartment, everything looked painfully normal. The soft hum of the fridge. The TV on low. Mark was sitting on the couch, half asleep, one hand resting where that ring should have been. For a moment, I just watched him, the weight of that little metal circle pressing into my hand like proof. Proof of something I wasn't ready to name. He looked up when I didn't move. "Hey," he said, smiling. "You're late. Everything okay?" Everything was not okay, but I smiled back. Yeah, long day, that's when it started. The performance. 8 years of trust began to crumble behind a calm face and a fake smile. I didn't tell him about the ring that night. I just stood there, pretending I hadn't found the first thread of something dark unraveling under our marriage. Because deep down, I wanted to believe it was a coincidence. A mistake. Anything but betrayal. But when I slipped into bed beside him later, I could feel the distance between us like a wall. He turned away, already half asleep, and I lay there staring at the ceiling, the ring still hidden in my hand. I didn't know it yet, but that was the last night I'd sleep beside him without knowing who he really was. The next morning, I placed the ring in my jewelry box, behind a few tangled necklaces he never noticed. I told myself I'd ask him about it later, when I wasn't tired or paranoid. But all day, I couldn't focus on anything else. Every phone notification, every text from him. They all felt like tiny tests. I opened our wedding photos that evening. The one where we stood by the lake, my veil stuck to his shoulder because of the wind, his left hand resting proudly on mine, that same ring shining in the sunlight. I zoomed in on the engraving, M+C, always. I remember thinking how silly it was to believe in always. It's a word you only say when you don't know how short forever can be. The next few days, I watched him more carefully. The way he checked his phone in the kitchen instead of the couch. The way he suddenly started working late, saying there was a new client. And the way he avoided touching me, as if guilt made his skin flinch. Still, I didn't accuse him. Not yet, because part of me was terrified to be right. So I waited. I smiled. I cooked dinner. I played the loyal wife while that ring burned like a secret in my drawer. And then came the small, impossible detail. One evening I saw his hand again. Bare. No ring. When I asked about it, he just laughed. Oh, I must have left it on the sink. Don't worry, honey. But I knew he hadn't. Because I already had it. That night, I sat in the dark with the ring in one hand and my phone in the other. And that's when the idea hit me. To trace the taxi, the route, the receipt. To find out where my husband had really been. Before the taxi, before the driver's throwaway sentence, our life looked like something you'd brush past in a magazine. Not glamorous, not pristine, just arranged. 2 mugs drying on a rack. 2 toothbrushes in a cup. 2 pairs of shoes kicked off in the hallway, always a little crooked. That's the picture I want you to see first, because it's important to understand how ordinary we were. Ordinary is what you grieve when things break, not the big gestures. The little ones. We lived on the 5th floor of a brick building with a stubborn elevator that sighed like it had opinions. Our door stuck in summer and swelled in winter, and Mark liked to shoulder it open with a dramatic grunt that made me laugh every time. We had a couch we pretended to hate but secretly loved because it held the shape of us in its cushions. The TV remote was always under a throw blanket I never folded right. Our kitchen window faced a narrow alley and caught a sliver of sunset all year. Even in January, the light could turn the countertops soft and forgiving. On Sunday mornings, the apartment smelled like pancakes and coffee. We moved around each other the way people do when they've memorized the other's steps. I would reach for the whisk while he slid past with the fruit bowl. He would nudge the pan, I would nudge him, and the syrup would take too long to pour. We'd eat with our knees touching under the table. Sometimes he read me headlines. Sometimes I read him texts from my sister. Sometimes we just sat there breathing in the warmth. Because weekends are a kind of belonging when you share a home. I worked at a nonprofit where documents moved like turtles, and the copier had a vendetta against me. Mark worked in consulting, which meant call at weird hours, travel sometimes, and put out fires I don't fully understand. He had a tone for work, low and convincing, like he could calm a building down. I had a tone for mine too, starting bright and dimming as the day wore on. Evenings. We met at the door, exchanged bags and little stories, and stepped into the kind of conversations that do not feel like conversations, more like passing a baton back and forth. How was your day? Fine. You? Fine. And the music played quietly in the background of our life. We had friends who liked board games and camping. We weren't the loudest couple. We weren't the story at dinner. We were the ones who brought the second bottle of wine and made sure everyone had a seat. We hosted sometimes. Mark grilled vegetables on the cast iron like it was a test he wanted to ace. I set out mismatched plates that somehow looked intentional. Someone would say, "You two are so steady," and I'd feel this warm, modest pride. Steady sounded like a compliment. Steady sounded like a promise kept. There were rituals. Every Thursday night, we watched a show we agreed was slightly below our intelligence, but exactly at our comfort level. We had a running bet about a character's fate, and each time the show dragged it out, I'd throw a pillow at the screen and Mark would catch it mid-air, triumphant. On the first Saturday of each month, we cleaned to a playlist we'd built together over 8 years, adding songs when something good happened. Sunflower for the year we fixed the bathroom. Vienna for the year we almost moved. A sleepy jazz song for the night we danced in socks. We hung our wedding photo in the hallway where the light made it look older than it was. We were not perfect. We were not dreamlike. He left cabinet doors open like little flags of distraction. I collected expired coupons in a bowl because maybe they'll honor them anyway. He snored softly when he fell asleep during documentaries. I rewatched the same comfort movie every time I was sick and quoted lines before the actors said them. We had dumb arguments about laundry cycles and whether or not cilantro tasted like soap. It doesn't. Not to me. But we also had the quick repair, the sorry said in the doorway, the split second of soft foreheads touching, the sense that this is what grown-ups do. Mess and mend. Mess and mend. Holidays had their own choreography. We alternated families without resentment. His mother made the kind of cookies that broke into clean halves. My father told the same story about the winter I tried to build an igloo and was furious that snow had no instructions. Mark wore a necessary smile in my childhood living room and fetched salt for my mother without being asked because he noticed. I watched him carry both of our overnight bags across icy driveways, and it made me love him in this quiet, responsible way. I thought that was intimacy, the noticing. The folding of someone else's life into yours. There were plans, too. Not grand ones, practical hopes tied with small ribbons. We had a list on the fridge titled Later Things. Repaint the bedroom, get a real headboard, save for a longer trip than a weekend, maybe France or Portugal because wine tastes like sun there. A second list in the Notes app. Gifts we'd get for each other when money was less shy. He wanted a turntable because he said the sound felt like a memory. I wanted a Dutch oven the color of a storm cloud. Later things. The kind of optimism disguised as errands. On weekday mornings, he left earlier than I did. I'd hear the shower, the shuffle of his socks across the rug, the clink of the ring against the ceramic dish on his nightstand. He always set it there before drying his hands, then slipped it on after his watch. That sound became part of my morning like birds or traffic. 2 taps, ring and watch, and then his voice at the door. Back late tonight, new client, or home for dinner, promise. He'd kiss the top of my head if I was still under the covers. I'd mumble something about coffee. He'd laugh. The door would close and the apartment would return to its soft, occupied silence. We assumed a lot about each other. You build a life out of assumptions and then call them facts. I assumed he would tell me if something was wrong. He assumed I would believe him if he said it wasn't. I assumed our rhythms meant safety. He assumed our quiet meant I wouldn't notice. It's generous to call these assumptions trust. Sometimes they're just habits we never challenge because challenging them might topple everything we've balanced. I'm not saying there were no cracks. There were. The kind you paint over. We sidelined some things we should have named. There were weeks when we were 2 people living well and not quite living together. He'd come home exhausted, eyes glazed, promising we'd talk on Saturday. Saturday would fill with errands like sand filling a jar. I told myself that's what adulthood was, logistics. I told myself every couple I knew was tired. And honestly, many were. That's how the story hides, in the polite shared fatigue. When I talk about our normal life, I want you to feel the softness of it. Not because it was perfect, but because it was ours. The ritual of choosing a movie and not finishing it. The comfort of his jacket hanging by the door. The way he always bought too many bananas and I always turned the last ones into bread, proud of the small alchemy. His shoe prints on the doormat after rain. My sweater draped over the back of his desk chair. The ongoing debate over the right place for the olive oil. These are tiny strings that tie a life into a net. When the net breaks, you don't fall through one big hole. You slide through 1,000 small ones. One evening, about a month before the ring, we sat with takeout on the coffee table. A show paused mid-episode. He was telling me about a guy in his office who'd botched a presentation. The story made him animated, hands moving, eyebrows jumping with sympathy and irritation. I loved when he looked alive like that. He said, the guy blanked, completely blanked, and I could see it the second he looked at his notes. I asked, teasing, you never blank? He grinned, shook his head. Not when it matters. He held my gaze a beat longer than usual. I remember thinking it was a tender moment. Later, I wondered if it was a different kind of promise. We went on a short trip around that time, just 2 hours away, a quiet town with a lake that reflected clouds like a mirror. We rented bikes. We ate sandwiches on a bench. We talked about people walking dogs and whether we'd ever get one. He said the words someday and sensible in the same sentence, and I laughed because he sounded like someone's father. We found a small bookstore and left with 3 paperbacks we pretended we didn't already own. At night, in the hotel room, We watched the ceiling fan spin, and I listened to his breathing even out. My hand drifted to his, and I felt the ring against my knuckle, cool and certain. I didn't know how much weight I gave that assertion. I didn't know that certainty can be the easiest thing to counterfeit. The week before the taxi, he switched phone cases. It's small, I know. His old case was dark blue and peeling at the corners. The new one was slim and black and slightly glossy. Work gave it to me, he said when I noticed. And I believed him. He placed the phone face down more often after that. I thought it was a habit. Maybe it was. Some habits are alarms we snooze. Another small thing. His cologne changed. Not the brand, the amount. He started using less, or maybe none some days. It made him feel farther away in the mornings, like the air had emptied a little. I asked once lightly, "New rules at the office?" He said, "Headaches," and massaged his temple like proof. I offered tea. He smiled at me, grateful, and the conversation went back to groceries, parking, deadlines. I remember the last truly quiet night before everything shifted. We ordered Thai food. I put on that lo-fi playlist everyone uses when they don't want to choose. He sat on the floor leaning against the couch, and I braided his fingers with mine the way I had 1,000 times. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The city made its normal building sounds outside. The clock on the oven was a minute slow, and we never fixed it. He rested his head against my knee, and I stroked his hair. And in that small motion there was the whole case for us. Consistency, familiarity, care, without ceremony. We said goodnight. He turned off the lamp. In the dark he whispered, "Big week coming up?" I murmured, "You'll handle it." He kissed my wrist, a small, absent gesture I adored, and rolled over. I fell asleep to his breathing again, thinking about the list on the fridge, thinking about the headboard we still hadn't bought, thinking about pancakes. The next morning, he clinked the ring against the ceramic dish. Watch then ring, ring then watch, I can hear it even now. He stood in the doorway tying his tie and said, "Might be late tonight." I asked, "How late?" He shrugged. "Depends on the client." He smiled. The door clicked shut. When I cleared the breakfast plates, I found a receipt curled under his coffee mug, something from a deli near the office, nothing suspicious, nothing unusual. I tucked it in the bowl with the coupons and thought about how boring comfort can look on paper. That evening, he texted at 6:12 p.m., running behind. "Don't wait up." I believed it because that's what we did. We believed the easy versions of each other when the hard versions would require work. I heated leftovers. I watched our show alone and pretended I didn't mind. I left the porch light on. He came home at 11:40 p.m. He smelled like rain and city. His hair was damp. He set his keys down softer than usual, like he didn't want to wake anything. I hugged him and my cheek brushed his collar. For a second he flinched, just a twitch, like he'd forgotten I'd be there. Then he relaxed and said the right words. "Long day." I nodded and said the right answer. "I know." When he turned toward the bedroom, I watched his left hand without meaning to. The ring caught a glint of the porch light through the window. He rubbed it with his thumb, a habit. I remember feeling reassured. Isn't that ridiculous? To feel safe because of a glint? But that's how it was then. The glint stood in for everything we promised. I followed him down the hallway. He paused by the wedding photo like he often did, almost imperceptibly, and I loved that about him, the way he acknowledged our beginning. He stretched, yawned, and said, "Early start tomorrow." I said, "I'll make coffee." He said, "You're the best." It was a script. We performed it well. I fell asleep fast that night. I think he did too. Or maybe he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between his truths and his lies. I wouldn't know. When morning came, he left before dawn. The elevator groaned, the hallway light flickered, the door closed. I turned over and hugged his pillow. It smelled like us. And that, right there, was the last morning I believed our life was only what it looked like. Because later that day, I got into a taxi in the rain. And in that taxi, the driver said he'd seen more than one man forget a wedding ring. I wasn't ready to connect those dots yet. Not then, but a small warning had already blinked red and quiet. His phone kept landing face down, and when I kissed him goodbye that morning, he turned his cheek instead of his mouth. It wasn't a big thing. It wasn't a confession. It was a nudge from the edge of our map, and I ignored it until the map tore. When I first found the ring in that taxi, it didn't feel like discovery. It felt like static, a buzz at the edge of my thoughts that I kept swatting away. I didn't want it to mean anything. I wanted it to be a coincidence, a mistake. But mistakes don't echo for days, and this one did. The morning after, I acted normal. Or something close to it. I made coffee, packed his lunch, kissed his cheek at the door. Except now, every gesture felt slightly rehearsed, like I was reading from a script I'd once known by heart but had forgotten the rhythm of. He smiled like always. Same warmth, same softness. But behind that, I started to see things I hadn't noticed before. Or maybe didn't let myself notice. The quick checks of his phone screen always angled away. The sudden silences between his replies when we texted during the day. Little things. The kind that are only suspicious after something else has cracked. That night, I tried to bring it up without bringing it up. He was sitting on the couch, scrolling through something, the blue glow of his phone painting his face in fragments. I said, "You know, funny thing happened yesterday in my cab ride home." He didn't look up. "Yeah? What happened?" I watched him. Someone left a wedding ring in the back seat. The driver thought it was weird. He gave a little laugh. The kind that's polite but not curious. People forget all sorts of things. Imagine explaining that at home. I smiled too, my stomach turning. Yeah, imagine. He went back to scrolling. I went back to pretending. The next few days turned into small tests. I'd ask casual questions, just to see how he'd answer. How's that new client? What's the office like these days? Still meeting at the same cafe for lunch? Every time he'd give easy, tidy answers. Almost too tidy. Like lines rehearsed for a story that needed to stay neat. By Friday, I was tired of second-guessing myself. Suspicion is exhausting. It eats your sleep and chews your calm. So I decided to look for proof. Not because I wanted to catch him, but because I wanted to be wrong. That afternoon, I searched through the junk drawer. The one full of receipts, old batteries, and pens that only work if you scribble first. He always emptied his pockets there before laundry day. And there it was. A taxi receipt, dated the same night I found the ring. The drop-off address wasn't ours. It wasn't even near his office. It was a hotel. The kind of hotel you book by the night, not for conferences. I stared at the printed address, my hands shaking so badly the paper rattled. Maybe it was for work, I told myself. Maybe it was innocent. But the problem with innocent is that it starts sounding desperate when you have to keep saying it out loud. That evening, he came home smelling faintly of soap, not his usual cologne, not even the scent of our detergent. Just soap. The clean, impersonal kind from public restrooms. He leaned in to kiss me and I froze for half a second too long. He noticed, I could tell. His eyes flickered, uncertain. Then he smiled wider, overcompensating. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said too quickly. Just tired. It wasn't a lie. I was tired, but not from work. I was tired of hearing my heart whisper what my mind refused to say. Over the weekend, I tried to shake it off. We went grocery shopping. He teased me for buying the fancy olive oil again. We watched our show. We ordered pizza. He even brought me flowers, daisies my favorite. I wanted that to mean something. I wanted the world to return to its steady pulse. But when I leaned down to smell them, I caught the faint trace of a different perfume. Not mine, not his mother's, not anyone I knew. Sweet, floral, too polished. It lingered on the stems, the paper wrapping, even his sleeve. That night, I dreamt of the ring again, rolling across a car floor, spinning, catching light. I woke up sweating, my heart racing like I'd run from something. In the darkness, I reached for his hand. It was bare. He mumbled something about taking it off before bed because his finger felt swollen. I didn't argue, but when he turned over, I opened the drawer and looked at the one I'd found. The same shape. The same scratches. What were the chances? The following Monday, something shifted in me. I started paying attention to things I'd once ignored. Where his eyes went, what time his phone lit up, which messages made him smile. I told myself it was self-protection, not paranoia. But truthfully, it was both. That night, I checked the laundry basket before starting a load. His shirt collar had lipstick on it. Barely visible, a muted coral shade. Not bright enough to scream, but enough to whisper. Enough to hurt. I sat on the edge of the bed, shirt in one hand, the ring in the other, and thought, what's worse? Not knowing or knowing for sure? That question became my heartbeat. The next morning I followed him. Not far, just far enough to feel insane and alive at once. He left for work at 7:30, same as always. But instead of heading toward the subway, he took a turn down a quieter street. He walked into a cafe I'd never seen him mention before. Through the window, I saw him sit at a corner table, alone at first, then joined by someone. A woman. Long hair, brown coat, the kind of confident posture that fills a room even while sitting still. She smiled at him, and he smiled back. Not the tight work version of his smile, but the soft, unguarded one that used to belong to me. I didn't wait to see more. I turned away before she reached for his hand, because I knew she would. And I couldn't watch it happen in real time. When I got home, my legs were trembling. I dropped my purse, my coat, everything, sat on the kitchen floor and stared at nothing. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Somewhere outside, a car honked 3 times. The world went on, completely indifferent to mine falling apart. That night, he came home later than usual. He looked tired, but not anxious. That calmness made it worse. The ease of someone who believes his lie has been accepted as truth. "Good day?" I asked, pretending to scroll my phone. "Busy," he said. "Meetings back to back. You?" "Same," I lied. "Nothing new." We moved around each other in silence after that. I could feel the air between us stretch thin, like fabric about to tear. At midnight, I couldn't sleep. I slipped out of bed and sat in the living room, the ring on the coffee table glinting in the low light. I wanted to throw it, melt it, bury it. But instead I just stared. It wasn't just metal anymore. It was a question. What do you do when the person you trust most becomes your suspect? In the morning, I looked at him differently. Not angrily, just analytically. Every detail, every gesture, filed away like evidence. And that's when I noticed it. His hands. The skin where the ring used to sit was slightly pale, like it hadn't seen sunlight in a while. A faint tan line, but blurred, inconsistent. As if he'd only started wearing it again recently. That small mark was the loudest truth yet. He'd taken it off, more than once. And now he wore it like armor. That realization was the beginning of something colder inside me. Curiosity turning into certainty. Love twisting into analysis. I told myself I'd confront him soon, but not yet. Not until I was sure. And that's when I made a choice I never thought I'd make. I started to follow the trail. Phone records, credit card statements, taxi receipts. The quiet investigation of a woman who'd rather be wrong than blind. Because I wasn't just finding evidence anymore. I was preparing for the truth. And once you start down that path, there's no going back. The thing about discovery is, it doesn't happen all at once. It drips. A text you're not meant to see. A receipt that shouldn't exist. A scent that lingers too long. You tell yourself you're just connecting dots that aren't there. But one day, the picture finishes itself, and there's no way to unsee it. After that morning I saw him in the cafe, I told myself I'd never follow him again. But obsession is a sneaky thing. It doesn't roar, it whispers. And mine whispered every time his phone buzzed. Every time he came home too calm, too rehearsed. I started noticing the lies in the pauses, The way he'd take just a beat too long before answering something simple. The way his smile lingered after I said, "Where were you?" as if calculating the safest truth. That week, I finally gave in. I opened his laptop. I told myself it was for a practical reason. Tax files, something harmless. But I knew what I was looking for, even if I pretended not to. His email was still logged in. At first, nothing unusual. Work messages, newsletters, travel confirmations. Then, one folder caught my eye. Receipts. He wasn't the type to organize anything, not even socks. Why a neat folder for receipts? I clicked. Inside, hundreds of digital confirmations. Ubers, hotels, dinners. Some I recognized, some I didn't. And there, in the middle of the list, was one I'll never forget. A boutique hotel downtown, booked for 2 guests. The same date as the taxi receipt. The same night I'd found the ring. It was like the air got sucked out of the room. I clicked the confirmation, desperate for details. Check-in at 6:42 p.m. Checkout, 10:19 a.m. My hands shook as I scrolled down. In the special requests box, it said, "Please prepare champagne in the room." My throat went dry. He had never once ordered champagne for me. I stared at that glowing screen, heart pounding so loud it drowned out every sound in the apartment. I wanted to scream, to wake him up, to demand he look at the proof. But I couldn't move. I sat there until my body went numb. Then, quietly, I forwarded the confirmation to myself. Evidence. For what? I didn't know yet. I just knew I needed it. The next day, I called in sick. I couldn't face people pretending everything was fine. I stayed home, replaying every detail of our last few months. The late nights, the new phone case, the missing ring, the perfume on his sleeve. They all lined up now, like dominoes that had been waiting for me to notice. By afternoon, I was pacing. I needed answers that couldn't hide behind emails. So I called the hotel. My voice trembled, but I kept it steady enough. "Hi, I'm calling to confirm a stay from last Thursday night, under the name Mark Ellison." The receptionist clicked a few keys, polite and neutral. "Yes, I see that reservation. Would you like a copy of the invoice sent to the same email on file?" "No," I said quickly. "Just confirming. Thank you." There it was. Real. Not paranoia, not overthinking. Real. That evening, I couldn't even look at him. He came home humming, tossed his keys in the bowl, kissed my forehead, asked about dinner. His casual normalcy felt like a performance, and I hated that I knew the lines now. "Long day?" I asked, testing him. He nodded, loosening his tie. "The client's a nightmare. But hey, good news, we closed the deal." I smiled. "Oh? Did you celebrate?" "Yeah," he said without blinking. "Quick drink with the team." I almost admired how smoothly he lied. Almost. I needed more. Proof wasn't enough. I wanted to understand why. Why risk everything we built? Why lie so cleanly to my face? The not knowing was worse than the betrayal. So I did something I'm not proud of. I went through his phone while he showered. My hands were sweating so badly, the screen almost slipped. His password hadn't changed. Birth month and day, mine. For a moment, that irony burned like acid. Then I opened his messages. Most threads were normal: family, work, group chats. Then one thread stood out. No name, just a number. The message preview said, "Miss you already." My stomach dropped. I tapped it open. Her, "Miss you already." Mark, "Your trouble." Her, "The best kind." Mark, "I'm still smelling your perfume." Her, "Good. I meant for you to." That was from the same night of the hotel stay. Then more messages, scattered over weeks. Lunchtime check-ins, half jokes, innuendos that used to be ours. One photo from her. A hand holding a coffee cup. A delicate gold ring. And his reply, Next time, bring two. I nearly dropped the phone. I didn't know what hurt more, the words or the ease of them, the familiarity, like they'd built their own rhythm, their own secret version of us. I closed the messages, hands shaking. My reflection on the screen looked like someone else, someone who'd lost the story of her own life and found herself in someone else's version of it. When he came out of the shower, I was sitting perfectly still on the edge of the bed, pretending to scroll my phone. He kissed the back of my neck. "You okay?" he asked, towel draped over his shoulder. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." He didn't notice the tremor in my voice. He didn't notice the way I flinched at his touch, because he didn't look anymore. That night, after he fell asleep, I went back through the messages, every single one, piecing together the story of my own undoing. She worked near his office. They met for coffee 3 times a week. And she was married too. He mentioned her husband once, casually, as if it were a shared joke. There was no grand romance, no tragic love story. It was convenience dressed as excitement. 2 people stealing hours they pretended meant nothing, until they did. By the time dawn broke, I'd read everything, and I wasn't crying anymore. Something else had taken its place. Something colder. Understanding. Over the next few days, I watched him like someone watching a movie for clues. The way he adjusted his cufflinks before work. The pause before he answered texts. The sudden defensiveness when I asked simple things like, "What time are you home?" Every movement, every look I cataloged. I even started playing along, asking him about his client dinners, offering to pack extra food for late meetings. He always thanked me, always smiled. He didn't realize I was studying him, that every word he said was evidence. On Friday, something inside me snapped into focus. He left his jacket on the chair when he went to take a call. I checked the pocket. Inside, a hotel key card. Different hotel this time. Different week. Same story. That was the moment I stopped being afraid. The fear had burned itself out, leaving only clarity. I knew now. And knowing changes everything. That night, he kissed my cheek before bed, and I smiled back for the last time. Not because I forgave him, but because I was ready. Ready to plan. Ready to act. Ready to make him see what it felt like to be caught in your own lie. I slid the ring from my jewelry box and held it up to the light. It glimmered the way it always had. Simple, silver, unassuming. But now I saw it differently. Not as a promise, as a mirror, a reflection of everything he'd ruined. I placed it gently in my pocket. I already knew what I was going to do next. Grief has a strange rhythm. At first it's loud, full of noise and disbelief, but then it quiets down. It becomes sharp, deliberate, almost peaceful. That's what happened to me. After the night I found the hotel key in his jacket, I didn't cry again. I didn't rage or beg or break anything. I just stilled. And in that stillness, I began to plan. You learn a lot about yourself when you stop being someone's fool. I used to think strength meant forgiveness. Now I understood it meant control. Control over my time, my choices, my story. If Mark had been building his secret world piece by piece, I was going to build mine too. But mine would end with truth. The first step wasn't confrontation. It was patience. Because the truth is fragile, and if you grab it too soon, it slips away. So I played the role. Perfectly, I smiled when he came home. I asked about his clients, about traffic, about dinner plans. I laughed at his jokes. I even started packing his lunches again, neat and careful, like the woman I used to be. And all the while, I was studying him, waiting for the right crack in his act. I started documenting everything, not out of pettiness, but out of purpose. Screenshots of texts, copies of receipts, the hotel bookings, even the cab route from the night I found the ring. Each piece went into a folder on my laptop named Finances, a name he'd never think to open. Then, I started paying attention to her. The woman from the cafe. Her number was still saved without a name, but I found a clue in one of the messages. He'd said, "Lunch near Maple Street again?" Maple Street. That's where his office was, and also where a small design firm sat across the plaza. I searched online, and there she was, her photo on the team page. Her smile matched the one I'd seen through the cafe window. Her name was Clara. Something about her expression in that photo stung. Open, charming, exactly the kind of warmth Mark fell for. For a moment, I hated her. But the longer I looked, the more I realized I didn't. Because she wasn't the villain, not entirely. She was the mirror he'd chosen to look into. He'd built the lie, not her, so I didn't plan to hurt her. Not directly. The lesson wasn't for her. It was for him. The next weekend, I suggested we host dinner for a few of his coworkers. He looked surprised, maybe even relieved. "Really? You sure you want to?" I smiled. "Of course. We haven't entertained in ages." Might be nice. I knew he wouldn't invite her. That would be too obvious. But I also knew she'd hear about it. Office gossip always travels faster than guilt. While I prepped the table, I slipped the ring, his ring, the one from the taxi, into the drawer by the wine glasses. I didn't want to wear it. I didn't want to destroy it. I wanted it waiting like the truth, ready when needed. That evening, our guests arrived. Everyone laughed and ate too much and complimented the food. Mark played host perfectly. Charming, confident, full of ease. No one could have guessed the storm gathering in the quiet spaces between my smiles. When they left, he looked at me with something like gratitude. "Thanks for doing this," he said softly. It felt normal. "Yeah," I said. "It did, and that was the point." I wanted him to feel safe. I wanted him to think I was still inside the story we'd built together, because only then would the ending hit hard enough. The next part of my plan came from calm calculation. I knew confrontation wouldn't change him. I didn't want begging or apologies or half-truths. I wanted exposure, the kind that forces someone to look at what they've done, not to you, but to themselves. So I waited until his next business trip. 2 nights in another city, he said. I helped him pack, folded his shirts neatly, kissed him goodbye at the door. Then, when the elevator doors closed, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I found the hotel he'd mentioned in passing, easy enough with his credit card notifications still synced to our joint account. The same chain as before. He'd booked under a fake name this time, but the email receipt came through anyway. I smiled, sloppy, overconfident. I called the hotel. This time I didn't ask to confirm the reservation. I asked to update the email address on file. I gave them mine. When the confirmation arrived, I forwarded it to Clara. No message. No explanation. Just subject line, "He said you might like champagne." Then I powered off my laptop and waited. It took 2 days for everything to unravel. He came home from his trip quieter than usual. He kissed my forehead, avoided my eyes, and said, "Long drive back." "Missed you," I nodded. "You must be exhausted." That night, his phone buzzed on the counter while he was in the shower. One message. From her, Clara. "You could have warned me." Clara. I never wanted to be that person. I didn't need to read more. I'd already done enough. The truth was doing the work now. He came out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, humming like nothing had happened. I smiled at him, same as always. "Everything okay?" I asked. He froze for half a heartbeat before answering. "Yeah, why?" I shrugged. No reason. Inside, I felt a quiet satisfaction blooming. Not joy, not victory, just balance. The following morning, he left for work early. He didn't kiss me goodbye. He didn't send a text later either. By noon, I received an email from our phone provider, a change in billing information. He'd opened a new account. I almost laughed. He thought he could disappear, start over clean, but guilt leaves fingerprints. And he'd already left too many. I went to our bedroom, opened the drawer, and took out the ring. The metal felt colder than ever. I held it for a long time, thinking about the version of myself who had once believed in always. Then, without hesitation, I put it in a small envelope and wrote one line across the front. You forgot this the first time. Don't forget again. I left it on the passenger seat of his car. That night, he came home late again, eyes dark, shoulders tense. He didn't mention the envelope. He didn't mention her. He just poured himself a drink and stood in silence by the window. For once, I didn't ask. I didn't fill the quiet. After a long time, he said softly, "Something feels different." I met his eyes. "It is." He studied me, maybe realizing how much I knew, maybe realizing he'd already lost the version of me that still believed him. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He just looked small, and for the first time in months, I felt tall. That weekend, I started clearing out drawers, not as punishment, but as preparation. I didn't know yet if I'd leave or if I'd make him. But I knew I was done living in someone else's shadow. Every folded shirt, every packed box felt like reclaiming oxygen. By Sunday, the apartment was quiet again. Peaceful even. He was gone most of the day, probably trying to salvage whatever remained of his double life. When he returned, I was sitting on the balcony watching the city lights. He stood in the doorway for a long time, then said, "We should talk." I nodded. We should, but not yet. Not until I'd decided how his truth should be told, because the next step wasn't about catching him anymore. It was about confronting him, in front of the one person who deserved to hear it as much as he did, and I already knew exactly how to make that happen. Once you decide to stop being the victim, the fear goes quiet. It doesn't vanish, it just changes shape. It becomes something steadier, something that hums in your chest like resolve. That's what I felt in the days leading up to the confrontation. Not rage, not heartbreak, just purpose. Mark had no idea what was coming. He thought the silence between us was healing. He mistook my calm for forgiveness. But it wasn't forgiveness, it was timing. I was waiting for the perfect moment to let truth do the talking. That moment came on a Thursday night. He mentioned there was a company dinner. Formal end-of-quarter celebration, all partners and associates invited. He asked if I wanted to come along this time. He said it casually, maybe out of guilt, maybe to prove something. I said yes. The event was at a rooftop restaurant downtown, the kind that photographs well but feels hollow once you're inside. I wore a simple black dress, the same one from our 5th anniversary. He didn't notice. He just looked relieved that I'd agreed to show up. We arrived early. The air smelled like rain and city metal. Laughter spilled from clusters of coworkers already half drunk on bonuses and flattery. I smiled politely, shook hands, nodded at names I'd heard but never remembered. Mark drifted into conversations, charming as ever, holding his glass like a shield. And then I saw her, Clara, standing near the bar, a glass of white wine in her hand, trying to pretend she didn't see him. Her hair was pulled back. Her eyes darted toward us once, then away. It was clear she hadn't expected me to be there. Maybe she didn't even know I existed before the email. For a few seconds, our eyes met across the room. Neither of us smiled. It wasn't hostility, it was recognition. Two women suddenly aware they were sharing the same ghost. I turned away first. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't need to look at her to finish this. This wasn't between her and me. It was between me and the man who thought he could live two lives without either one collapsing. Dinner began, and conversation turned loud. Clinking glasses, applause, toasts. Mark stood up at one point, giving his little speech about teamwork and success. Everyone cheered. I watched him, every syllable smooth and practiced. He had no tremor in his voice, no guilt on his face. You'd think he was spotless. When he sat down, I leaned close enough for only him to hear. "You were right," I said quietly. "Champagne really does make things special." He froze. "Barely, but I saw it." The fork paused halfway to his mouth. He turned, trying to read my expression. "What do you mean?" he whispered, I smiled. You'll see. Then I stood and excused myself from the table. I walked to the bar, calm, deliberate. My phone was already in my hand. I'd been planning this for days. On the screen, I had a small collection: photos of the hotel receipts, the messages, the taxi ring, and the email thread with Clara. I'd also recorded one of our conversations the night before. His casual client dinner lie spoken into the air like nothing. I wasn't planning to scream or cause a scene. That would have made me look small. No, I wanted something cleaner. Something he couldn't talk his way out of. The restaurant had a small open mic setup for announcements, positioned right near the bar. I waited until the music dipped between songs, then tapped the microphone lightly. The room hushed. "Hi," I said, smiling at the crowd. "Sorry to interrupt. I just want to say a quick thank you for inviting me tonight. It's nice to finally meet the people my husband works so closely with." Mark's head snapped toward me. He looked confused at first, then alarmed. I saw him start to rise, but I continued before he could reach me. "I've heard so much about this team, and especially about your long hours, the late nights, the client trips." A polite laugh rippled through the room. Mark's face had gone pale. "Thing is," I went on, "sometimes those long nights come with souvenirs." I reached into my bag and held up the ring, the one I'd found in the taxi. It caught the overhead light perfectly. Gasps, murmurs. I let the silence stretch. "This was my husband's wedding ring," I said, steady, almost conversational. "He lost it in a taxi a few weeks ago. The driver told me he wasn't the first man that night to forget one." I didn't understand what that meant until I started finding patterns. Mark stood now, voice tight. "Clara, that's enough," I turned to him. "No, Mark, you've had enough." He froze. His colleagues looked between us, stunned, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. Clara sat motionless at the bar, face white, glass trembling in her hand. I set my phone on the counter, screen glowing with the photos, one after another, his texts, the hotel bookings, the messages that left no room for excuses. The truth spoke louder than I ever could. "Marriage," I said softly, "isn't about perfection. It's about presence. About keeping promises when no one's watching. I thought we had that." I really did. But I was wrong. Turns out we were just pretending to be good people who never get caught. The room was dead quiet now. Mark's jaw tightened. His boss was staring at him like he'd just turned into a stranger. Clara looked like she might vanish into her chair. I smiled one last time. "No need to clap. I'm done performing." And with that, I walked out. The night air hit me like freedom. Cold, clear cutting. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could hear him calling my name faintly behind me, his voice drowned by traffic and rain. But I kept walking, down the street, past the cab stand, past everything that used to define me. The city lights blurred through my tears, but they weren't the kind of tears that weaken you. They were the kind that rinse you clean. I got into a cab, same kind as before, same smell of pine and cigarette smoke. The driver looked at me in the mirror. "Rough night?" he asked kindly. I laughed once, sharp and small. "You could say that." I reached into my purse, pulled out the ring one last time, and set it on the seat beside me. "Someone else can forget it next," I said. The driver nodded, said nothing more. We drove in silence through the wet streets, the city passing like a dream finally ending. When I reached home, I sat in the dark living room. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. For the first time in months, the air felt still. Empty but honest. My phone buzzed once, Mark. Then again, voicemail. Then silence. I didn't listen. I didn't need to. I already knew everything he would say. "I can explain." It didn't mean anything. "Please, let's talk." But betrayal doesn't need translation. It speaks its own language. So I turned the phone face down, exhaled, and finally let the quiet in. The morning after the dinner felt unreal. It wasn't peace exactly, more like the quiet that follows a thunderclap. The kind where the world holds its breath, unsure whether to start over or collapse. I woke up early, before the sun. The apartment looked the same, but everything inside it had changed. His jacket still hung on the chair. His toothbrush still leaned against mine in the cup. Our photo still smiled from the hallway. But none of it meant anything anymore. It was all just evidence of a life that had expired quietly, without witnesses. I sat on the couch for a long time, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled faintly like him. For the first time, there was no urge to cry. No shock left to process. Just a deep, tired acceptance. I'd seen the truth with my own eyes. He'd seen it too, and neither of us could go back to pretending. Around 9, there was a knock at the door. Soft, hesitant. I didn't have to check who it was. I could recognize that rhythm anywhere. I opened the door halfway. Mark stood there, rumpled, eyes red, tie gone. He looked smaller, as if the air had been taken out of him. "Can we talk?" he asked. For a moment, I thought about closing the door, about saying nothing and letting silence answer for me. But something inside me wanted closure. Not for him, for me. So I nodded once and stepped aside. He walked in like a stranger. Didn't sit. Didn't take off his coat. Just stood there, searching for words that wouldn't come. "I didn't know how to face you," he finally said. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I almost laughed. The way he said this, like betrayal was a spilled drink instead of a choice. "Didn't mean for what?" I asked quietly. "The lying? Or the getting caught?" He flinched, like the words had weight. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said again, softer. "It just got out of hand." "Out of hand," I repeated, letting the phrase hang. "That's one way to describe living two lives." He rubbed his face, exhaling. "It wasn't serious, Clara. It didn't mean anything." "I was bored," I interrupted. He stopped, mouth half open, eyes full of something that might have been shame. "I don't know," he said finally. "Maybe," I nodded. That was the first honest thing he'd said in months. We talked, or rather, he talked and I listened. He said it started casually, that he hadn't planned it, that it was never supposed to go that far. Every sentence was a wound disguised as explanation. He apologized, over and over, but each sorry sounded like it belonged to someone else's mouth. When he finally stopped, I said, "You know what the hardest part was?" He looked up, hopeful maybe that I'd say something small, something fixable. "The hardest part wasn't you cheating," I said. "It was realizing that while I was building a life, you were building an excuse." He didn't answer. He couldn't. I walked to the counter, picked up the envelope where his ring had been. It was empty now, just the indentation of what used to fill it. "I'm not going to scream or throw things," I said. "That would be giving you too much. I just need you to leave." He swallowed, nodded slowly. "I'll come back for my stuff later," he murmured. "No rush," I said, "just not today." He hesitated like he wanted to hug me, or touch my arm, or say something that could undo it all. But I stepped back. He got the message. He walked out, closing the door behind him. The sound of that door clicking shut was softer than I expected. But it echoed for a long time. For days after, I lived in the space he left behind. Quiet mornings, slow afternoons. I worked from home. I stopped checking my phone every few minutes. I started breathing again, really breathing. Sometimes I caught myself doing something small and ordinary, folding laundry, watering plants, and realizing I didn't feel watched anymore. That was new. That was freedom. The apartment changed too. Not all at once, but gradually. His shoes disappeared from the hallway. His coat hook stayed empty. The ring indentation on the nightstand gathered dust. Even the air smelled different, lighter, cleaner, like the space itself was exhaling with me. One night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window. The city lights shimmered in the rain, the way they had the night I first found the ring. Back then, I'd felt trapped in a puzzle I didn't understand. Now I felt something else. Not peace exactly, but power. Because I had survived knowing. And knowing is its own kind of freedom. About 2 weeks later, Clara reached out. An email, short, restrained, polite. "I don't expect you to reply. I just wanted to say I didn't know you existed until that night. I'm sorry for my part in it. I read it 3 times. She didn't owe me an apology, not really. He was the one who made the promises. But still, her words landed softly. Like a period at the end of a long, brutal sentence, I typed a reply. Thank you. I believe you. Let's both do better next time. Then I hit send and felt lighter. Spring came slowly. The days lengthened. I started sleeping through the night again. Sometimes I'd wake up at dawn and walk to the park near our old coffee spot, the same cafe where I'd seen him with her. At first it hurt, but over time it became my place again. A reminder that pain doesn't get to own the spaces where it happened. I began rebuilding small things. A new playlist, fresh sheets, a haircut that made me look like someone who'd made it through a war quietly and won. I joined a yoga class. I even took a solo trip. Just 2 days by the ocean. A little hotel room with salt on the windowsill and no memories attached. I sat by the water for hours, watching waves fold into each other, thinking how endings don't always crash. They can also fade. When I came home, I deleted the folder from my laptop. All the evidence, the receipts, the screenshots, gone. It had served its purpose. I didn't need proof anymore. I'd already lived it, and surviving something is the best kind of evidence. A month after the confrontation, he emailed me. No subject line. Just a few sentences. I'm sorry for how I treated you. I know I ruined the best thing I ever had. I'm getting help. I hope someday you'll be happy again. You deserve that. I didn't reply. Because I already was happy. Maybe not fully, maybe not loudly, but quietly, steadily. The kind of happiness that doesn't depend on anyone else keeping their promises. I printed the email, folded it once, and tucked it into a notebook labeled Lessons. Not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder. That I could survive truth. That I could rebuild from wreckage. That I could trust myself again. One evening, as summer approached, I took a cab home from work. Same company, same scent, pine and cigarette smoke. The driver hummed to an old song on the radio. I smiled, remembering the first night everything began. The driver caught my eye in the mirror and said, "Rough day?" I shook my head. "Not anymore." He smiled back, and we drove in silence. When I stepped out, I looked down at the seat beside me. No ring this time. Just my bag, my keys, my life. Completely mine. I tipped the driver and walked away without looking back. Healing doesn't arrive with trumpets or sunshine. It sneaks in through small routines, gentle mornings, and the quiet certainty that you're done living inside someone else's story. I was still healing, but I was free. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. I used to believe stories ended when the truth came out. Like once you find out someone betrayed you, that's it. Fade to black, roll credits. But real life isn't that clean. Truth doesn't end things. It just forces you to live differently. After Mark left, I learned how quiet healing is. It doesn't come from grand gestures or perfect closure. It comes from small, stubborn acts of self-respect. Getting out of bed when you'd rather disappear. Making dinner for one and sitting at the table anyway. Watering a plant that's half dead just because it's still trying. The first time I laughed again, it startled me. It was something small. My coworker spilled coffee on his tie and made a joke about starting a new art trend. And there it was, laughter. Not polite, not forced. Real. It felt like a sound I hadn't heard in years. That night, walking home, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not at him, not at her, not even at myself. Anger had done its job. It had burned away everything that wasn't real. What was left was quieter, stronger. It wasn't forgiveness. It was freedom. Sometimes people ask how you get over something like that. The answer is you don't. You just carry it differently. The memory stops feeling like a wound and starts feeling like a scar. Something you notice sometimes. But that doesn't define you anymore. For a while, I caught myself scanning faces on the street, wondering if one of them was hers. Wondering if he'd found someone new to lie to. Then one day I stopped wondering. Not because I stopped caring about justice, but because I realized justice had already happened. The moment I walked out that night, the moment I took my life back, that was justice. He had to live with what he did. I got to live without it. There's a strange kind of beauty in that trade. A few months later, I visited my parents for the first time since everything happened. My mother hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs might break. She didn't ask for details. She just said, "You look like yourself again." And that's when I realized I did. Not the same woman who'd believed in always, but someone who believed in again. In trying again, loving again, trusting again. But this time, beginning with myself. I walked through my childhood garden where she still grew daisies. The same flowers Mark once brought home, wrapped in perfume and apology. I knelt, touched one of the petals, and smiled. They didn't mean the same thing anymore. They meant resilience now. They meant I'd survived something meant to break me. One night I found myself scrolling through my old photos. Our wedding, our trips, the lake, the laughter frozen in pixels. For a moment I wondered if I should delete them, but I didn't, because they weren't lies. They were just moments of two people who didn't know how temporary they were. And that's okay. Not all happiness has to last forever to be real. Some happiness is meant to teach you what love should never feel like again. I printed one photo, the one where we're standing by the water, sunlight on our faces. Not as a memorial, but as a marker of where I came from. I tucked it in a drawer behind my passport. A quiet reminder that beginnings can be beautiful, even when endings are brutal. Months passed. The ache softened into memory. I started saying yes to things again. Coffee with friends, weekend trips, new books. I even went on a date once. He was kind, nervous, told terrible jokes. When I laughed, he said, "It's nice to see someone smile like that." And I thought, he has no idea what it took for me to smile like this again. I didn't fall in love with him. But I learned I still could someday. And that was enough. Every so often I still get into taxis, sometimes late at night, sometimes after work. And I always glance at the seat beside me. Not because I expect to find anything, but because that's where it all began. That's where I picked up the truth I wasn't ready to hold. That's where I found the ring that ended one life and began another. The drivers are always different. Some talk, some don't. But once in a while, one of them says something ordinary that feels like poetry. Last week, one said, "People forget things in here all the time, but they never come back for them." I smiled. "Maybe that's the point," I said. He laughed, not knowing what I meant. But I did. I wasn't coming back for anything I'd left behind. I tell this story now because I want someone else, maybe you, to know that losing what you thought was forever doesn't mean losing yourself. It means you finally meet the version of you that doesn't settle for half love. The version that demands honesty, not perfection. The version that can sit alone and still feel whole. I used to think the worst thing in the world was being lied to. But now I know the worst thing is lying to yourself, pretending you don't already see the truth because you're afraid of what comes next. And the best thing? The best thing is realizing you survived it. That you didn't need the apology or the explanation or the closure. You just needed to remember who you were before the pain and who you could still be after it. When people ask if I miss him, I say no. But sometimes I miss who I was when I believed in him. That version of me, naive, hopeful, open, she was beautiful. She didn't deserve what happened, but she deserved who she became afterward. And that's who I live for now. Not revenge. Not memory. Just her. The woman who learned that losing love isn't the end of your story. It's the rewrite. So if you're listening to this right now, and you've been through something similar, if you've found your own version of a forgotten ring, I want you to know that you will breathe again. You will laugh again. You will build a life that feels like sunlight instead of shadow. And one day you'll look back and realize the moment you thought broke you was actually the one that set you free. Did you like my story? Please like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of mine travels. And if you take one thing from it, let it be this. Sometimes the things we lose are just clearing space for the things that are meant to stay. That's not heartbreak. That's rebirth. And rebirth, I've learned, is the most honest kind of love there is.